Quibi raised $1.75 billion. It was dead in 6 months. That is not a typo. $1.75 billion. Gone in about half a year. This wasn't a scrappy startup burning seed money. This was one of the best-funded media launches in history. It was run by people who had already won at the highest levels of entertainment and technology. And it still collapsed almost immediately. Quibi stood for Quick Bites. The idea was simple on paper. Short, premium video, built specifically for phones. Content you'd watch in small chunks. During a commute, on a coffee break, in line at the store. High production value, big name talent, chopped into bite-sized episodes made for a phone screen and nothing else. The leadership team wasn't a pair of first-time founders pitching a deck. These were two of the most respected executives in entertainment and technology. People who had built and sold massive companies before. That track record is exactly why investors wrote enormous checks before a single product existed. Not after a beta test, not after a pilot, before. That detail matters more than almost anything else here. Investors weren't betting on a prototype. They were betting on a resume. Resumes, no matter how impressive, don't tell you whether one specific untested assumption is true. Then, two things happened almost immediately. Neither had anything to do with the quality of the shows. Quibi launched in April 2020. Read that again? April 2020. That's not an unlucky quarter. That's the exact month a global lockdown eliminated commutes, idle waiting, and every in-between moment the entire product was built around. Think about what Quibi's core use case actually was. 10 minutes on the subway? 5 minutes in a checkout line? A break between meetings? Standing, not sitting. Micro moments of stolen attention while you're physically out in the world. In April 2020, almost none of that existed. People weren't commuting. People weren't standing in lines outside their homes. The entire behavioral pattern Quibi was engineered around got switched off almost overnight, for reasons that had nothing to do with Quibi itself. You could call this bad luck. Partly, it was. Nobody could have predicted a pandemic lockdown landing on their launch month. But bad luck only sinks you when there's no cushion underneath it. Quibi had built no cushion. It had never tested whether the underlying commuting moment habit was strong enough to survive any disruption at all. The second problem was self-inflicted. This one had nothing to do with timing. The Quibi app had no way to cast video to a television. You could not send it to your TV. Not because the engineering was too hard. Not because it slipped through the cracks. It was a decision made deliberately, based on the founding assumption that people only wanted mobile-only video. Locked at home during a lockdown, people wanted their screens bigger, not smaller. Every other habit shifted toward the living room. Streaming services built around the television surged. Quibi had structurally cut itself off from the one screen everyone was suddenly staring at all day. That casting decision wasn't a bug. It was a feature. By design, nobody stress-tested that belief against a world where people were stuck at home. Commuting disappearing wasn't something anyone had budgeted for. Nobody had run an experiment against it. So here's the actual mechanism at work. It's worth being precise, because this isn't a story about confident leaders making bad decisions. Confident, experienced leaders make plenty of good decisions. That's usually why they get the next job, the next round of funding, the next big platform to run. The problem isn't confidence itself. The problem is what confidence lets a team skip. A strong track record buys trust. Trust removes friction. Removed friction means fewer people in the room asking whether the basic assumption had actually been confirmed. When a team has never been wrong at this scale before, nobody wants to be the one who slows things down. Nobody wants to be the one demanding a cheap, boring test of the founding premise. Quibi spent enormous sums on content, on stars, on production value, before testing whether the core viewing habit even existed at a smaller scale. Not a full library, not signed talent. Just one basic question. Do people actually want to watch premium short-form video specifically because they're mobile and in between places, badly enough to pay for it? That question could have been tested cheaply, for a fraction of a percent of the eventual budget. It wasn't, because nobody with enough seniority in the room felt they needed to ask it. By the time real user data came in showing weak engagement, hundreds of millions of dollars were already committed to shows that couldn't be unproduced. The expensive test happened. The cheap test never did. Once you've spent hundreds of millions building the thing you assumed people wanted, there's no version of going back to check that assumption that doesn't feel like admitting the whole project was premature. This exact pattern shows up constantly outside of streaming video. It's worth walking through a few other shapes it takes. The specific industry doesn't matter. The sequencing error does. Picture a well-funded startup with a founding team that already had one successful exit. Investors trust them enough to fund an entire product suite up front, 5 interconnected tools, a slick onboarding flow, integrations with a dozen other platforms, months of engineering before a single paying customer touches anything. A less experienced founder would have been forced to prove demand early. Nobody would have handed them the capital to skip that step. A proven team gets the benefit of the doubt instead. So the team builds the whole suite first. They reason their instincts are strong enough to skip the small, cheap test. A single landing page describing the core feature, collecting emails or pre-orders, before writing a line of code for the rest. If that landing page test had run first, and the core feature got a lukewarm response, the team would have known in a week, for the cost of an afternoon, instead of finding out 18 months later, for the cost of the entire suite. Second scenario. A company with a track record of successful launches decides to introduce a new product line with a large national ad campaign. Leadership has run winning campaigns before. They trust their instinct for messaging. They commission the full campaign, broadcast spots, agency fees, a media buy locked in months in advance. Nobody runs the cheap version first. A small focus group, a limited test audience shown 3 different messaging angles, asked which one actually makes them want to buy. That test costs a rounding error compared to the media buy. It could catch a confusing tagline, a value proposition that doesn't land, an audience mismatch, all before a single national ad airs. Instead, the campaign launches at full scale. The tracking numbers come in soft. Now leadership debates whether to pull an expensive campaign midstream or ride it out. Neither was necessary if the messaging had been validated first, for the cost of a few hours of a market research firm's time. Third scenario, close to Quibi's own industry. A product team, backed by leaders who have shipped hit apps before, decides to build an entire mobile app around one core workflow they believe users want. Full engineering team, months of sprints, a polished release candidate, before anyone outside the building has touched the actual workflow. The cheap test here is a simple prototype, a clickable mock-up, or even a manual, fake version of the workflow run by a human behind the scenes, shown to a handful of real target users to see if they actually complete it and come back for more. That test can happen in a week, with no engineering resources at all. Skip it, and you find out whether the core workflow resonates only after the full build, when changing course means rewriting the product instead of rewriting a mock-up. But here's the part nobody expects. The problem was never that Quibi's leadership lacked judgment. Their judgment on almost everything except this was excellent. That's exactly what makes this dangerous for good managers to hear. If Quibi had been run by inexperienced amateurs, this story would be boring and predictable. It's unsettling precisely because it was run by people who had every reason to trust themselves. Here's the one point worth sitting with, and it's mine, not the case studies. Track record doesn't just earn you the benefit of the doubt from investors. It quietly revokes your own team's permission to double-check you. That second effect is the more dangerous one, because nobody outside the room can fix it for you. So what's the actual fix? In practical terms, not a slogan, a sequencing rule. Validate the smallest, cheapest assumption first. Before funding the expensive version of anything, isolate the one belief the entire plan depends on. Then find the cheapest possible way to check if it's true. For Quibi, that assumption was simple. Do people want short, premium, mobile-only video badly enough to pay for it? Not because of star power, not because of production budget. A cheap version of that test could have looked like this: a handful of ready-to-watch clips, made for phones, given to a small paid test group, months before signing a single big-name star. The goal: see if the underlying viewing behavior showed up at all, at any scale, under any conditions, including a scenario where people were mostly at home. This sounds obvious in hindsight. It always does. The reason it doesn't happen in practice is that the cheap test feels beneath a team with this kind of track record. It feels like busy work for people who haven't earned trust yet. That feeling is exactly the trap. The bigger and more credible the team, the more discipline they need to run the boring test first, not less. Quibi tested its content budget before it tested its core premise. Any manager launching something new should flip that order, on purpose, every time, regardless of how many times they've been right before. Before you approve the big budget, the big campaign, the big build, ask what the cheapest possible version of the real test looks like. Run that first. Even if running, it feels like an insult to your own experience. Especially then. The lesson from $1.75 billion evaporating in 6 months isn't that big bets are bad, it's that the size of the bet should never outrun the size of the test that came before it. Follow for more theories that actually explain your workplace.